So I watched a leader pitch a room, and within 10 minutes, they went from being totally skeptical to on board, and my jaw dropped. So that's when it really hit me. Great leaders are actually marketers at heart. Hey guys, I'm really excited to join with Mika today, who's a marketing expert to talk about how marketing skills can make us better leaders. Hey Mika, welcome.
Hey Liz, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm really curious. When did you first notice that overlap between what made a great marketer and great leadership?
I think when I first realized the connection between a great marketer and great leadership was when I worked for an organization as a salesperson. And we had a CEO that kind of embedded his brand story into everything that he did. So he would get on the floor, on the sales floor, and talk to us directly,
Mhm.
come into our meetings, and really just advocate for his company and his story. He also made us a part of the company's story as well. So
Oh.
you can just kind of see that woven through the fiber of the organization. So it made it really easy for us to be brand ambassadors
Mhm.
for this organization. And I think that really translated into how we interacted with our customers.
So you said brand story, and I think actually when we were working together, that was the first time I sort of heard of that concept. Of course, we know about brands, but when you mean brand story, can you just elaborate a little bit more?
Certainly. So it's really just going through, you have this persona of your ideal customer, whether that be an internal team or an external customer that your organization is servicing. And it's really just identifying their problems and taking them through the journey as making them part of the experience.
Mm.
So they are part of finding a solution, although you're guiding them along that solution.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, the whole persona, that's another thing. And that is in when we use artificial intelligence, that prompting or figuring out who's your target audience. And I have done that in even when I'm trying to write an email to someone, thinking about how would they receive that information? What are their pain points, depending on kind of what department they work in. I see a lot of times that leaders just feel like they're not getting buy-in. Maybe they're new to the organization or they've had to make a pretty big change and you see kind of that resistance. Sometimes it's not necessarily the idea, it's how they've positioned it. Could you share an example, maybe either positive or negative of that, just so that our listeners can really picture that better?
Certainly. So, one of the examples I think of a brand that kind of was iconic and then ended up falling out of range is BlackBerry. So, BlackBerry was, everyone had one, the doctors had it, business people had it. It was this really awesome smartphone device, but it didn't keep up with the market because it simply didn't listen. So, it's really important for leaders to listen, to gather feedback, and then to make database decisions. Also, they have to establish credibility for themselves. A lot of times it's easy for a sales manager to say, yeah, get hyped up, sell, make the mark, you do what you have to do. But hearing it from someone who had to build a business from the ground up establishes more credibility. So
Mhm.
it's important to have that face time with teams, with employees and staff, and be able to collaborate with them as well. So it's important to have that so that we listen in and
Mhm.
we gather the feedback and then we make a decision with that input.
Okay. So from a leadership perspective, then it's almost what I'm hearing you saying is you've got to be more involved, like more asking more questions, looking at the data, like looking for that feedback loop instead of just taking a step back. How does a leader do that though? Because I almost can see this friction of being too involved or maybe being seen as like a micromanager, but I'm trying to see where that works out.
Certainly. I feel like leaders have to also kind of do an assessment of their own selves, like knowing their strengths and weaknesses and having the trust to be able to delegate some responsibilities, especially in a creative process, to those subject matter experts.
Mhm.
And I also think to gather buy in, people will be more inclined to contribute or to support a leader if they know that they have some skin in the game and that they were somewhere along the line a part of the process, whether it was a small idea or a really innovative idea.
Yeah. That's huge. Like gathering the buy-in, like what's an example of something where you've seen that work really well, where people have felt like they're part of the process instead of just been, hey, here you go. Here's this new process we're going to do for administration or whatever that new thing that leader is trying to present.
Certainly. So I did work for a very small business that had two sectors. They had a service side and they had a public facing product side that they sold products through dealers and distributors. Now their services side was more high level. It was things that they weren't able to share to the public because of various guardrails in place. And so this particular business hadn't really had a presence on social media. They did have a website. They did a lot of their marketing face to face. They were entrenched in their community,
Mhm.
but their community was also very niche. So they had a reputation to maintain. And they were just delving into the world of social media. They knew it was a necessary evil. They had to have it to move forward. And they were completely resistant at first to, okay, let's get a Facebook page up. Let's get an Instagram page up. Let's start interacting. And how that we were able to kind of convince all of the people involved was basically to tell the owner's story of what was his journey to becoming a business owner. And he was able to comfortably walk in himself and say, well, here's who I am, in this role as a CEO and in my prior experience. And here's who I am with my family, my personal interests, my love of sports and running and taking care of myself. So in doing that, he was actually able to grow his brand and reach out into many different demographics that he didn't even initially think, because he wasn't showing that side of himself.
Mm.
He was very guarded and he was very concerned about the feedback he would receive from his community.
Yeah.
But the feedback was overwhelming and he was able to touch other audiences. And by doing that and demonstrating it and just kind of having a plan and presenting to them, the benefits of this outreach on these additional channels, we were able to slowly draw other people in, and they were participants and they began helping record videos and
Yeah.
provide footage and images that we could use to help tell their story
Yeah.
and sell their products on these other channels. But it was a very slow process.
Well, I love and hate that you mentioned it was slow.
It was slow, yeah.
I think sometimes one of the marketing, this concept of it is a process, right? And so
Mhm.
if we start with something and we say, okay, I'm going to get buy-in, or I'm going to share more of my story and I'm going to give more context, like that takes time.
It
All those
does.
things eat away at your time. And if you're impatient, then you may abandon something. So if he had stopped halfway through, you don't get to see the tail end of those benefits.
It's true.
Now, you also talked about social media, but I think that you have an interesting environment where some leaders are pretty hesitant when it comes to social media. And it's like you said, some people say it's a necessary evil. Others are saying, hey, I don't see the benefits of it. What would you, if you're talking with someone who had reticence about it, what would you tell them in terms of like what the marketing says, what the research says, in terms of just the pros and cons of it?
I'm really a person that is all about stats. So, whenever I'm trying to argue a case for something like what are the benefits of social media, I go immediately to the numbers. I love to look at competition, so I do a lot of research and I try to prepare that in a way that's easy for the person I'm trying to convince to digest. So it's pulling the numbers, it's going in, looking at those engagements and those interactions at a potential competitor for them, so that they can see for themselves the benefit that you might potentially be missing the mark by not engaging on these platforms.
Okay.
Yeah, so I feel like that's really important. Just being able to show that in a quick visual snapshot has been really helpful. And just, stating the case like, hey, you really need to be here. I think everything shows social media is not going away.
Mhm.
It is where people get information quickly.
Yeah.
As our, attention span shortens, we need to digest content really quickly. We have to get people in as quickly as we can. I believe it's within the first 7 seconds of, putting content out there. Uh, it's a really easy argument once you're able to show the numbers
Yeah.
and the
Okay.
interactions.
Dang, 7 seconds. And what's interesting is because what I was just thinking about is how much that translates to the real world. We're in the social element, right? I'm going to look at something and within 7 seconds, I've decided if I'm going to commit to it. But how much of that as a leader, when you're having a conversation with someone or you're having a meeting, our attention span has been significantly reduced. So are you
It's
getting to
true.
the point? Have you stated your intent? Have you given the information? Wow, that's really, really significant.
So I think that's also why it's important for leaders to establish their own branding, their own personal branding, so they can kind of understand, because sometimes you really will have to meet in the middle, especially when it comes to people that are resistant to change or organizations that are resistant to change. So you have to kind of be able to bend and flex with what are their capabilities, or what are they comfortable with, and what is demanded by the consumer and the public.
Well, I mean, the thing that you helped me so much with was like thinking about as a leader, the people that I work with they are customers, but it was that mindset shift of what do your employees want, what do your coworkers want, what does your boss want, all of these things. And then you mentioned change, and I remember you always talking about, okay, when people are resistant to change, it could be because of like a habit, it could be because of just like fear, uncertainty. But if you're trying to help a leader to navigate that change, what marketing principles would you give them to help them with their stakeholders, right? The employees that they're working with.
Absolutely. I like to go to the concept of what's in it for me,
Oh,
right?
yeah, with them.
Very simple, straight to the point. Constituent stakeholders, they want to know what's in it for them.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I think it's really important to outline that. Also, to have a clear vision. Clarity is very important because a lot of times, we depend on leaders, followers depend on leaders to know where we're headed, where we are right now, where we're going. So I think that needs to be very clear, and it needs to be very consistent.
Mhm.
And yeah, know the audience that you're speaking to. This is the first time, I believe, in history that we have all of the generations working together in one workplace, right? So it's hard to get people on board. For simple things like implementing, software or applications and things like that. So I definitely think people need to know what's in it for them. They need to
Yeah.
see that outlined, and that needs to be consistent
Mhm.
throughout any communications.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned generations, and that's something that I'm sure marketers look at very distinctly.
Mm-hmm.
From anything from, all right, well, who's on what platform? We know we tend to understand who's on Facebook versus things like that. I'm curious what you've learned in terms of just the different generations and how that can translate for what leaders should be thinking of when they're trying to work with that wide span of people.
Absolutely. I think that this is why I really feel it's important for leaders to have that FaceTime with their teams, because they can learn about people. I
Yeah.
really believe that people are at the center of everything.
Hmm.
So you can understand their behavioral patterns, their characteristics, their interests, and their aspirations, and really play off of that. So yes, in a workplace, you may have, a Gen Z, you may have a millennial, you may have a Gen Xer, you may have a baby boomer. So really being sensitive to that distinction between each grouping and how you're crafting your messaging to help get them on board or get their buy-in. And also, it's very important for each group to have a contribution, to be able to have input into a project or an initiative, because I feel like having that type of diversity drives a lot of creativity and collaboration.
Hmm.
So always just being open to collaborate, gathering feedback.
Yeah.
So just not discounting or counting anyone out, but just having that openness to learn.
Yeah, the divergent thought. I mean, and it's definitely something as a leader you have to communicate. There's going to be conflict just because everyone is coming from a different perspective. But if you celebrate that you and
Mm-hmm.
I are going to disagree on something, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately whatever we work on will probably be better than if we just did it asynchronously.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good. I am curious, like, what's advice for a leader to get that input from those individuals without jumping into a stereotype and going, oh, well, I know based on this book I read, you think this way or you want this thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important not to stereotype, because everybody at the end of the day is an individual, even though we
Mhm.
may have certain characteristics that seem similar because of our experiences or things in the environment that have influenced our journey. But I really loved when you would kind of get everybody together and we would have a new person join our team, and they would just share a little bit about themselves,
Mhm.
about their background. So that way you kind of can dispel certain myths about people or things that you've heard by them actually having a platform to speak, even if it's for a few minutes,
Yeah.
to share who they are as a person
Mhm.
outside of the workplace, outside of a strict organization, to just say, here's who I am, because everybody is so multifaceted.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was something I stole from, someone else, but it was great. It was a very open-ended, just, hey, we just want to do slides and have a
Hmm.
picture of your family or have a picture of things that are important to you and things that are
Exactly.
interesting, very open-ended. So I want to go back. You talked about personal brand, and I think that sometimes people look at that in a negative way, obviously in the realm of influence or of almost that self-promotion. But you mentioned at the beginning like how important it is to make sure you have that context, make sure you have that story. And so from your perspective, why is it important for a leader to develop that personal brand in an authentic way?
I think a lot of times leaders are sometimes almost untouchable, right? They seem larger than life at times, and oftentimes there's a power distance
Mm,
between those that they are leading and those decision makers.
mhm,
So I think, I'm not saying that a leader should bring themselves down to level, but because you still want to be able to assert authority when needed, you want to be able to guide, and you want to be able to be respected. But I
mhm,
think that at the end of the day, people need to understand that leaders are people as well.
mhm.
I think that having a little glimpse into human experience outside of being the leader of an organization can create a place where there's like this intersection of, oh, we have some commonality. Like I can relate to you. You have had at some point along your journey a relatable experience. And I
Mhm.
think that is kind of where you're able to connect with people, whether you're a leader, whether you're a company, a brand, or a business trying to reach your customers. If you can relate to something that touches them in some way, shape, or form, then I think that is where you can kind of catch them
Yeah.
and you can begin your messaging. So personal branding is a lot of things. It's how do you see the world? And it's an evolving process. It's not like, oh, this is my brand. It is what it is. It can
Yeah.
evolve and change, right? As you develop and grow and have different experiences throughout life. But when you're sure of who you are, where you're headed,
Yeah.
of your vision, things that matter to you, the things that you value that are important, your traditions, even if they change, right?
Yeah.
Becoming a mom, that creates a new reality,
Mhm.
that creates a new experience. So when people can connect with that and see a piece of their experience there, I think that's where you have that opportunity to
Yeah.
collaborate.
And I have seen the leaders that show that little bit of vulnerability, like Brene Brown talks about, where people can feel that connection.
Mm-hmm.
You're right, that power play, how can you reduce it just a little bit so that if you and I are working together and I'm saying something incorrect, that you'll correct me and say, hey, when you mention brand, let me get you to 100%, instead of going, okay, well, I'm just gonna let that person keep talking.
Yeah, I think there has to be a comfort, if you have additional information or insight, feeling comfortable enough to be able to share that,
Yeah.
because I think that teams help leaders to make leaders look good as well, right? So that's why I'm like, play on those strengths and weaknesses, and then reaching out into your teams for those subject matter experts that can, and it complements each other, right? A team complements their leader, and their leader complements the team as well. So
Yeah,
I think that's really important.
definitely. And what I so I know you've been in marketing sales for 20 years. You've been someone who has been a leader, been a follower and everything. And I think sometimes leaders that are trying to tell their story or their brand that are more introverted have a little bit more concerns like, okay, that seems more of like what an extroverted individual would do.
Mhm.
What would your advice be to them? Not to stereotype you, but I know you're typically a little bit more introverted than maybe like what I am.
Yes, I am. I would definitely describe myself as an ambivert. So I kind of feel like I meet in the middle. I'm not incredibly outgoing, but I do love people. So I love learning about people. I love hearing their stories. And I think that sometimes as an introvert, you do have to take risks and you really have to work, right? It's always constantly doing work on yourself. So I feel like if you want to affect, 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 change, like sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, to 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 to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going to have to take those moments to, 'cause sometimes as an introvert person, you're just going speak in public. You're going to have to talk to people. You're going to have to reach out. And you're going to have to get out there. But I think that you really have to find, whether you're introverted or extroverted, your authentic self and convey that. So for me, I'm more of a writer, I would say, more so than a speaker.
Okay.
So being able to write and craft messages, I think that has always been something that is a strength for me. So in communication, I think I can articulate better in writing. So, and because I like people and I love to learn about people, I can kind of communicate in a way that reaches them.
Yeah.
In a team where I have, particularly in creative teams, I've noticed that you will have some people that are very extroverted and you'll have people that are largely introverted because
Yeah.
they're very much focused on
Your graphic
their
designers.
craft and their art, right? And I made the mistake sometimes when I had the opportunity to lead,
Mhm.
of trying to push people outside of their comfort zone so that I could develop them. But you can't always do that. You kind of have to meet people where they are
Yeah.
and play off their strengths.
Yep.
So I think that's when it's time to pick up, have someone else step in at times to fill in. I think it creates that balance. So
Hmm.
definitely, I would say as an introverted person, I have had to put myself in uncomfortable situations in order to be able to affect change
Yeah.
and lead others.
Yeah. I mean, that is like leadership 101, probably marketing 101, and definitely when you've done sales, and especially those cold calls.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, do you like rejection? Yeah, no one does, and get used to it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Sales will definitely, it's a very humbling experience. It will for sure get you out of your comfort zone.
Mhm.
Yeah, calling and rejection, people saying no, and but
Yeah.
you have to do what you have to do because when you're in sales, there's a number that you have to meet and you have to get it done. And if you sign up for the job, you have to be willing to be all in
Hmm.
and willing to learn and improve.
Hmm.
And there's so many opportunities out there to sharpen skills, such as
Yeah.
public speaking or communications, organizational communications,
Mhm.
and all of that. So I'm a firm believer in.
I mean, yeah, I mean, just hearing some of your stories of obviously being if you're in a really small marketing team, there's a sales element to it.
Yes.
And I think like a nightmare of mine is, to be like a marketer or something, because
Yes.
like awesome, can't wait. Like every day to get my, someone messing with me or hanging up the phone or just, you just never really know what you're gonna face.
Yeah, yeah. I think I feel like certain personality types do well with certain things like that, and they can handle it. And I think that's kind of why it's important to know who you are at your core,
Yeah.
because that's really not going to change a whole lot, but you can certainly compensate by kind of gaining more skills and more experience and just testing the waters and learning to kind of manage, right? Manage those uncomfortable situations.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure.
Well, going back to you talking about this concept of capitalizing on your strengths, I like that because we do want to grow people. But if you are an Olympic swimmer, why would I then try to push you to run? So
Exactly.
that's a really interesting nugget for me to take away. And then interestingly, when we kind of start off in leadership, a lot of our communication is oral, it's the public speaking. But going up, I remember working at the Pentagon and we had these general officers and high ranking civilians, and they wouldn't get a lot of face time with the Secretary of the Air Force or the Chief of Staff. That was everything they sent up was written. And so it was really interesting you mentioning that concept of a superpower that introverts may have more so. It's like, hey, if you're a little bit more comfortable with writing, that's going to benefit you in the long run.
Absolutely.
I think Secretary Mattis is a pretty good example of that in his book. He like has all these examples of some of the letters that he wrote to his folks because he couldn't go out and speak to everyone, um, but he could make sure that his words were there.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was just a really aha moment for me in terms of, I mean, and how much of marketing is in a written form still. So
Yes, very much so. Yeah. I think it's definitely a nice fusion of, you've got photographers, you've got videographers,
yeah,
you've got writers, you've got people that are willing to be the face of a brand or company. And when you bring that all together, you can really make an amazing product.
yes, man, this has been so great.
Yeah.
I do want to like to sum it all up, right? If you are a leader and you're not in sales maybe, or maybe you are, but you're trying to take some marketing principles and apply it to your work so that you can become better, what are the things that you would tell them to consider? I know partially you've already mentioned some of that with just like making sure you're telling the story,
Mm-hmm.
providing context, getting the buy-in. That's some great things. But is there anything else that you would say, hey, when I've studied marketing or when I've studied that intersection of marketing and leadership, here's something that, man, like this is what the best do?
I think something I would recommend is to do a inventory of yourself, of your teams, your followers, and that's literally creating a persona. Who is your ideal consumer, customer, follower, audience? Just gathering those insights about what they like, their interests, what they aspire to, literally creating almost like a profile
Okay.
About this person. And then also identifying what are their headaches,
Okay.
what is hard, what is difficult for them, what is challenging for them, and then outlining possible solutions for
Okay.
them. And literally creating that for every audience that you're touching.
Okay. All right. So if you have different teams, so if I have a team that does like human resources, I'm going to create a persona for them. And then if I have
Mm-hmm.
like my accounting team, I create a persona for them.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Exactly. So you're creating this persona to just better help you to understand how do they consume information?
Mm,
How do they process that information?
yep.
What is their likely response to that?
Oh man, I can just see just like once again opening up AI and saying like let me
Exactly.
describing them and then
Yes. Correct. AI is great in doing that. And I've used it to help me
yeah,
because, sure, I have some information and some knowledge from my own experiences out there,
yeah,
but it can help you gather that information more
yeah,
efficiently and actually compose it for you. And then, of course, can go in and tweak it a little bit.
yeah,
Another thing I love to do is actually gather that information for my competitors as well.
yeah, yeah,
So I go in and I create that so I can kind of see where do we meet and where, what makes us different.
yeah,
So I think that's really important for leaders to do.
yep.
Also, getting that face time,
Okay,
face to face, being able to communicate verbally
yep.
and written form, but keeping that message consistent. So, whatever that is, whether it's your personal vision or goal
Okay,
or mission, or the organization's vision, goals, and mission,
yep.
to be able to have that as a redundant theme
Hmm.
throughout whatever process or initiative is taking place.
Yeah,
So that way, teams can always look back and refer to that as they're working and hopefully along the way becoming part of the journey. And they should be able to see that journey. So once you've created this persona, you have this journey at various steps along the process and having actionable items literally written out
mm,
for what you can do at each step along the journey once you have this persona, this customer, this
yep.
person that you want their buy-in. You're illustrating, here's what I'm going to do at each step along the way.
Okay,
Here's my intended result.
okay, gotcha. So if
And the
I
result
go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, the result is a direct response to their challenge, right? Once we've identified who they are, what they're looking for, and what's wrong, like what's the problem,
Yeah.
what do we need to solve, and making them a part of that.
Yeah, you just got my head like really spinning because I think what has been very powerful is when leaders have addressed your headaches or your pain points. And now it's a two-way conversation of saying, hey, this is what I've noticed is your pain point. And then
Mhm.
they can finesse that and say, actually, yeah, the onboarding isn't the issue. It's the fact that, we're not able to do our day-to-day admin tasks. So when you are in those positions where you feel like you haven't been heard or someone doesn't know what your pain point is,
Mhm.
there's a really big like chasm. There's that divide
Yeah,
between the leader and the followers because they don't get it.
exactly. Yeah. Listening is so important, and that you mentioned that gathering feedback as well.
Mhm.
So I know I've encountered organizations that don't want to do the surveys. They don't want the feedback. I had one that, you go onto an Amazon.com or Google reviews or wherever, and we collect this feedback from our customers, but there's some companies, they don't want that feedback. There's some organizations, because they know that once they open that door, it might be really bad.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have to really look in the mirror and say, okay, what are we doing wrong? So I think even with employees, it's important to gather feedback from them in different departments to really figure out what is wrong, what are their problems, because maybe you can pull from that something that you may not have thought of, but also it makes them feel like they are being heard, but then having that action after to follow.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a perfect solution, at least to show like we're working towards a solution.
Yes. Yeah. At least you haven't just ignored it. You bring up a really good point on survey. I know a lot of people have some negative feelings towards it. And obviously everything has to be taken with a grain of salt, but going back to just your earlier conversation, it's data. And so the more data that we can collect doesn't mean we have to always act on it. But at least we have that information. And partially also it's just how the survey is laid out is really important too. And that was something I noticed when you worked in our marketing realm within like a military unit, was getting feedback on some of our events and those suggestions. And it all goes back to what you talked about with how do you get feedback from individuals? How do you get the divergent thought?
During it.
And once again, the best marketers, y'all are always just saying like, hey, yep, give us the data. Let's look at the trends. Let's investigate this almost from like a scientific perspective and a little bit less like of personal.
Yes.
And so
that you mentioned that, it makes me really think of a concept that leaders can keep in mind. It's the we versus me marketing, right? So yes, we versus me. So a lot of times we're like, well, I think this would be great. I think this is cool. Even as a marketing person, we have all these wonderful ideas, but is it what they want, right? Is it what our customers or consumers want? So looking at getting messaging out or looking at getting buy-in as a we versus a me.
Yeah. Man, we just gotta drop the mic on that, Mika. If that's like, leadership and marketing 101, we versus me. Oh my goodness. Oh, I love it. Well, I really appreciate you just spending time today with us. If you do want to reach out to Mika, I will put her information down in the comments. And so she is fantastic. Could brag about Mika forever with her marketing skills and sales skills. She has an amazing tea company. I love her tea, Wish Tea, and that will be down there as well. But Mika, just thank you so much for imparting your wisdom today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yes, we will talk soon.
Talk soon.